What happens when the perfect fairy tale shatters in the most public way imaginable? We see the lives of the ultra-rich as a fantasy. Glittering galas, endless wealth, a love story for the ages. Julian Croft, the tech billionaire, and his radiant, pregnant wife, Isabella, were the world's golden couple. But on a cold October night, under the crystal chandeliers of the Savoy Hotel in London, in front of hundreds of cameras, that fantasy became a nightmare. One moment a tender touch, the next the sickening crack of a slap that echoed around the globe. This isn't a story about a simple argument. This is a story about how a single, brutal act can expose a universe of secrets, lies, and a conspiracy so deep it could tear an empire apart. What could make a man who has everything risk it all with one swing of his hand? The answer is far more shocking than you could ever imagine. The air in the grand ballroom of the Savoy was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, the glittering apex of London's philanthropic calendar. And at the heart of it all, holding court without a throne, were Julian and Isabella Croft. Julian Croft was a man sculpted from ambition and success. At 35, his company, Nexus Dynamics, had revolutionized renewable energy, making him not just a billionaire, but a visionary. He had sharp, intelligent eyes, a jawline that seemed carved from granite, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and secure billion-pound deals. Tonight, he was immaculate in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Beside him, a perfect counterpart was his wife, Isabella. She was beauty and grace, personified a former art curator, whose quiet intelligence was often overshadowed by her stunning looks. Tonight, she wore a flowing emerald gown of silk chiffon that elegantly draped over her 5-month pregnancy. The gentle swell of her belly was a public declaration of their shared future, the next chapter in their celebrated love story. Her dark hair was swept up, showcasing a cascade of diamond earrings, a recent gift from Julian. To the outside world, they were flawless. He the titan of industry, she his elegant, adored muse. The cameras adored them. The gossip columnists revered them. Their life was a curated masterpiece of polo matches, yachting in Monaco, and romantic getaways that filled the pages of lifestyle magazines. But a masterpiece can have cracks invisible to the naked eye. As the evening wore on, a subtle tension began to coil around their table. Julian's smile, usually so effortless, seemed bolted in place. His hand, when he placed it on Isabella's back, was less a caress and more an act of possession. His fingers were just a little too tight. "Are you all right, darling?" Isabella murmured, her voice a soft melody against the din of the orchestra. She placed her hand over his. It was cold. Julian's eyes didn't meet hers. They were scanning the room, flitting from face to face with a paranoid intensity. "I'm fine." He clipped his jaw tight, just enjoying the evening. But he wasn't. For the past 2 weeks, a poison had been seeping into his mind, drop by insidious drop. It had started with an anonymous email, then a misdelivered private investigator's report to his office, filled with grainy photos of Isabella having lunch with a male friend, an old university colleague. Benign, yet the accompanying text was venomous. "Does she look like a woman carrying your child, or someone hiding a secret?" The architect of this poison was a man named Damian Thorne, a ruthless business rival Julian had bested in a hostile takeover 2 years prior. Thorne had been publicly humiliated and financially wounded. He had vowed revenge, but Julian, arrogant in his success, had dismissed the threat. He never imagined the revenge would be so intimate, so personally destructive. Thorne had spent a year meticulously planting seeds of doubt, using proxies and anonymous channels to feed Julian's deepest insecurity, that he wasn't worthy of a love as pure as Isabella's seemed to be. Tonight, the poison was reaching its peak. Damian Thorne was here at a table across the ballroom, watching with a predator's patience. A few minutes earlier, he had approached Julian at the bar, a condolent look on his face. "Julian, my friend." Thorne had said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "I hope whatever is troubling you and Isabella passes. A beautiful family like yours, it would be a tragedy to see it broken by misunderstandings." He let the word hang in the air, a veiled threat wrapped in concern. Now back at his table, Julian watched as Isabella laughed at something a guest said. It was a beautiful sound, but in his corrupted mind, it sounded like a betrayal. The PI report had mentioned her easy laughter with her friend. Was she laughing at him? Was this whole perfect life a charade? The final speaker of the night, the Foundation's director, took to the stage. He began to speak about the importance of family, of protecting the innocent, of building a safe future for children. Each word was a hammer blow to Julian's fractured psyche. And now the director announced, "We'd like to honor a couple who have been our most generous benefactors, a true example of love and partnership. Please join me in a round of applause for Mr. Julian and Mrs. Isabella Croft." A spotlight flooded their table. The room erupted in applause. This was the moment. They were supposed to stand, wave, and embody the fairy tale. Isabella turned to Julian, her face alight with a genuine, proud smile. The love in her eyes was unmistakable, a beacon in the storm of his paranoia. "Julian, they're honoring us. Isn't it wonderful?" She reached for his hand. In that moment, her pure, unsuspecting joy was the final trigger. To his sickened mind, it was the ultimate act of deception. The gall of her to look so innocent, while in his mind, she was carrying another man's child and making a fool of him in front of the world that worshipped him. He stood up. Isabella started to rise with him, her smile still radiant. "Don't touch me," he snarled, his voice a low, terrifying growl that only she could hear. Her smile faltered. Confusion clouded her beautiful features. "Julian." "What's wrong?" she whispered, her hand still outstretched. He looked from her hand to her face, to the gentle curve of her stomach. The future he had so desperately wanted, now a symbol of his humiliation. The applause continued, a deafening soundtrack to his private hell. Damian Thorne was watching, a faint, triumphant smirk on his lips. It was all too much. The pressure, the paranoia, the public adoration that now felt like mockery. In one swift, horrific motion, Julian's carefully constructed world imploded. He drew his hand back and slapped her. The sound was sharp, ugly, and absolute. It cut through the applause like a guillotine. A collective gasp, a tidal wave of shock swept across the grand ballroom. The orchestra faltered, a violin screeching into silence. Every phone, every camera, every eye was locked on them. Isabella stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, not in pain, but in sheer, unadulterated shock. The stinging on her skin was nothing compared to the shattering of her heart. Tears welled instantly, not of sadness, but of disbelief. The man she loved, the father of her child, had just struck her in front of the entire world. For a frozen second, there was only the tableau. The billionaire, his hand still half raised, his face a mask of rage and instant regret. the beautiful pregnant wife, her world destroyed, and the silent, watching crowd. Then the silence broke, and the crowd turned against him instantly. The silence that followed the slap lasted only 3 seconds, but within that void, an entire Emma began to crumble. It was a silence filled with the frantic clicking of camera shutters and the horrified, indrawn breaths of hundreds of people. Then came the roar. It wasn't a cheer. It was a wave of collective revulsion. The first voice to cut through was a woman's sharp cry from a nearby table, "You monster!" Suddenly, the spell was broken. The room, once a sea of polite smiles and quiet murmurs, erupted into a cacophony of outrage. Phones, which moments before were discreetly tucked away, were now held aloft, their small red recording lights, blinking like 100 angry eyes. The live stream of the gala, meant to capture philanthropy in action, was now broadcasting a billionaire's downfall in high definition. Julian stood frozen, the tingling in his palm, a horrifying echo of his action. The red haze of his rage evaporated as quickly as it had descended, replaced by a chilling, gut-wrenching clarity. What had he done? He looked at Isabella. Truly looked at her for the first time in weeks, past the veil of his suspicion. He saw not a deceiver, but the woman he had vowed to protect. Her eyes wide with a pain so deep it seemed to suck the air from his own lungs. Her hand was still on her cheek, her body trembling. Before he could utter a word, a figure moved with purpose from the table next to theirs. It was Beatrice Allister, a formidable woman in her late 60s, with silver hair styled in an elegant chignon, and a reputation for philanthropy matched only by her sharp tongue. She was old money, a matriarch of London society, who feared no one, least of all a new money tech mogul having a breakdown. Ignoring Julian completely as if he were a piece of furniture, Mrs. Allister wrapped a steadying arm around Isabella's shoulders. "Come, my dear," she said, her voice firm but kind, a rock in the swirling chaos. "You will not stand here for one more second." Isabella, seemingly in a trance, allowed herself to be guided away. As she passed Julian, she didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask of dignity. That lack of acknowledgement was more cutting than any scream or accusation could have ever been. He had ceased to exist for her. Julian reached out a desperate, reflexive gesture. "Isa, wait." His words were swallowed by the rising tide of condemnation. "Shame on you," another guest shouted. In front of everyone, a man yelled. The security detail, initially paralyzed by the profile of the individuals involved, now began to move, forming a clumsy barrier around Julian, as reporters freed from the constraints of polite society surged forward. "Croft, why did you hit your wife? Is there trouble in the marriage? Is the baby okay?" The questions were like shrapnel. He staggered back, his mind unable to process the cacophony. His eyes darted across the room and locked with Damian Thorne's. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of performative, grave concern. Thorne even shook his head slightly as if to say, "What a tragedy." He was already playing his next move, distancing himself, becoming a concerned bystander to the demolition he had engineered. Julian's security team, led by a stoic man named Marcus, finally managed to hustle him towards a service exit. The walk was a gauntlet of pure hatred. People who had shaken his hand an hour ago now stared at him with contempt. They didn't step aside. They forced his security to carve a path through their disgust. As he was bundled into the dark corridor behind the kitchens, the last thing he heard from the ballroom was Mrs. Alistair's voice ringing with authority, directed at the gawking crowd. "Give the woman some dignity. All of you put your phones away this instant." In a quiet private suite on the hotel's 5th floor, secured by Mrs. Alistair's influence, Isabella sat on the edge of a silk-covered bed. A hotel doctor had just finished checking her vitals, reassuring her that physically both she and the baby were unharmed. The red mark on her cheek was already beginning to fade. The invisible wounds, however, were catastrophic. Mrs. Alistair dismissed the doctor with a grateful nod and sat beside her, handing her a glass of water. "Drink this, child." Isabella's hands were shaking too much to hold the glass. Mrs. Alistair held it to her lips for her. For a long time, Isabella said nothing. She just stared at the intricate pattern on the Persian rug, her mind a whiteout of shock. The public humiliation was a burning fire, but beneath it was the icy core of betrayal. The man who had recited poetry to her under the stars in Tuscany, the man who had cried with joy when she told him she was pregnant, the man whose child was moving inside her at this very moment, that man had looked at her with pure hatred and struck her. It wasn't him. She finally whispered the words, "horse." Mrs. Alistair raised a skeptical eyebrow. "My dear, I saw it with my own eyes. The whole world saw it." No, Isabella insisted, a flicker of her old strength returning. She looked up, her gaze clear and intense, despite the tears. "I mean, that man in the ballroom was not my husband, not the man I married. Something is wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong." She had seen glimpses of it for weeks. The paranoia, the sleepless nights, the sudden sharp questions about her past. He had become distant suspicious, a ghost haunting their perfect home. She had tried to talk to him, but he had pushed her away, retreating further into a fortress of dark thoughts. She had assumed it was the pressure of a new acquisition his company was making. She had never in her wildest nightmares imagined this. "He's been manipulated," Isabella said, the conviction growing in her voice. "Someone has been poisoning him against me." Her mind, sharp and analytical, from her years as a curator, piecing together the history of art, began to work. She thought of the strange stunts, the veiled comments. And then a name surfaced in her memory. Damian Thorne. She remembered Julian mentioning his strangely solicitous behavior recently. She remembered the look on Thorne's face at a board meeting she'd attended months ago, a look of cold, calculating hatred directed at Julian. Downstairs, Julian was finally bundled into the back of his Rolls-Royce Phantom. The car was immediately swarmed by paparazzi who had been alerted. The flashbulbs were relentless, a blinding, predatory storm. Inside the silent, leather-clad cocoon of the car, Julian slumped against the seathead in his hands. His phone was vibrating incessantly, a frantic text from his head of PR viral. "Croft slap trending #1 worldwide. Stock futures in freefall. Call me now." He ignored it. All he could see was Isabella's face, the shock, the hurt, the utter destruction of her trust in him. The poison that Damian Thorne had poured into his ear now seemed like a pathetic, flimsy excuse for an act of unforgivable brutality. He hadn't been a manipulated man. He had been a weak one. He had allowed his own insecurities to be weaponized against the person he loved most. He had flown to the sun and, in a moment of mad pride, had melted his own wings. But he hadn't just fallen. He had dragged his pregnant wife and his unborn child down into the fire with him. The crowd had turned against him instantly, but the most damning judgment had been in Isabella's eyes, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that winning back the world's approval would be nothing compared to the impossible task of winning back hers. The 24 hours that followed the slap were not a news cycle. They were a global maelstrom. By dawn, Julian Croft was no longer a visionary billionaire. He was a meme, a villain, a hashtag. His face, contorted in rage, was juxtaposed against Isabella's look of stunned betrayal on every major news network, from CNN to the BBC. The headline in The Sun was simple and brutal. The Beast and the Beauty. Nexus Dynamics. The Empire. Julian had built from nothing was an empire of glass, and the world was now throwing stones. By the time the London Stock Exchange opened at 8 a.m., its stock had entered a free fall so catastrophic it triggered automatic trading halts. Investors weren't just nervous, they were morally repulsed. The company's board of directors, a collection of powerful figures who had once idolized Julian, convened an emergency meeting without him. The agenda had only one item, Clause 7 of his contract, the morality clause. Holed up in his sterile minimalist penthouse overlooking the Thames, Julian was a king in a kingdom of one. He hadn't slept. He had watched the news until the repetition of his own monstrous image made him physically sick. He had showered 3 times trying to scrub the phantom feeling of the slap from his skin. Marcus, his head of security, stood by the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear, taking in a relentless stream of bad news. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual deference. "The board has voted. They're invoking the morality clause. They've requested your immediate and indefinite leave of absence. The press release is scheduled for noon." Julian didn't react. He was staring at a framed photo on his desk. It was of him and Isabella in Santorini, taken a year ago. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the setting sun catching the gold in her hair. He had been so sure then of his own goodness reflected in her eyes. "And Mrs. Croft?" Julian asked, his voice a rasp. "She remains at the Savoy, sir, in the royal suite. Mrs. Alistair has arranged for her own private security. My calls to her team have been rebuffed. They have made it clear that any attempt by you to approach or contact her will be met with a restraining order." Each word was a nail in his coffin. He was being surgically excised from his own life. His personal phone buzzed. It was his mother, a formidable woman calling from their family estate in the Cotswolds. He answered. "Julian," she began, her voice devoid of warmth. "I have just seen your father, a man who has never shown a moment of weakness in his 70 years. And he was weeping, not with anger, but with shame. Whatever you have become, it is not the son we raised." The line went dead. The weight of it all finally broke him. He swept his arm across his desk, sending the photo his laptop. Everything crashing to the floor. He sank into his chair, a strangled sob escaping his lips. This was the true consequence, not the money, not the company, but the severing of every bond of love and respect he had ever known. In the quiet luxury of the royal suite, Isabella was mounting a different kind of response. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. She was not a victim to be pitied. She was a woman who had been wronged, and she needed to understand why. With the formidable Beatrice Alistair by her side, orchestrating a protective shield around her, Isabella began to piece together the puzzle. "Damian Thorne," Isabella said again, more certain this time. "He has to be behind this. Julian would never—" She trailed off. He had. But he had been pushed. Beatrice, using her vast network, made a few discreet calls. Within hours, a picture began to emerge, a whisper from a disgruntled former employee of Thorne's. A tip from a financial journalist who had been tracking Thorne's unusual short positions against Nexus Dynamics stock, placed a week before the gala. He wasn't just planning for a downfall, he was betting on it. The most crucial piece of information came from a junior IT technician at Nexus Dynamics, a young woman whom Isabella had once mentored when she visited the office. Terrified of losing her job, but fiercely loyal to Isabella, the technician called a private number Beatrice had provided. "Mrs. Croft," she whispered, "there's something you need to know. For the last month, Mr. Croft's private server has been compromised. A series of encrypted files were uploaded from an external source. They were designed to look like they came from a private investigator's office in another country. I saw the logs. They were untraceable, ghost-like. But the source IP, just for a millisecond before it was masked, pinged back to a holding company, a company owned by Thorne Industries." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "What was in the files?" The technician hesitated. "I only saw a file name before the system locked me out. It was Project Nightingale." Project Nightingale. It meant nothing to her. But it was a thread, and she pulled on it. Meanwhile, she knew the world was watching, waiting for her to speak. Her silence was being interpreted as weakness, the silent suffering of a battered wife. She needed to reclaim her own story. She turned to Beatrice. "I won't be a victim in his story, or in Damian Thorne's. I need to speak, not to a tabloid, but to someone serious, someone who deals in facts, not sensationalism." Beatrice nodded, already scrolling through her contacts. "I know just the person. Clara Vance. Her interviews are legendary. She's tough fare, and she can't be bought." Across London, in his opulent Mayfair office, Damian Thorne was celebrating. He poured 2 glasses of vintage Macallan whiskey and handed one to a man sitting in the shadows. "To Project Nightingale." Damian toasted, his eyes glittering with triumph. "More successful than I ever could have imagined. He didn't just crumble. He detonated." The man in the shadows, a disgraced geneticist named Dr. Aris Thorne. Damian's distant, debt-ridden cousin took a nervous sip. The files were convincing then. The fabricated DNA report, convincing. Damian laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Julian has one great weakness, Aris. Pride. All I had to do was suggest that his perfect wife, his perfect life was a lie, that the child he so desperately wanted wasn't his. I gave him a file showing a 99% probability that the fetus was related to Isabella's old university friend. Your work was very persuasive." Dr. Thorne shifted uncomfortably. "It was falsified data, Damian, a complete fabrication. If anyone ever investigates—" "Who will investigate?" Damian scoffed. "Julian is a pariah. Isabella is a broken woman. By the time the dust settles, I will have absorbed the remnants of Nexus Dynamics, and he will have nothing. He took my company, so I took his life. An eye for an eye." He stared out the window at the gleaming towers of the city. He hadn't just won a business deal, he had authored a Greek tragedy. And he, the villain, was the only one left standing to enjoy the view. He was sure of it. He had accounted for Julian's pride and Isabella's love. He had not, however, accounted for her strength. Clara Vance was a journalist, who moved with the quiet lethality of a panther. She didn't chase stories. Stories came to her drawn by her reputation for unearthing the truth with surgical precision. When she received the call from Beatrice Allister, she cancelled a scheduled interview with a cabinet minister. This was the real story. The interview was not set in a sterile television studio. At Isabella's request, it took place in the library of Mrs. Allister's Belgravia townhouse. The room was filled with old books and the quiet dignity of history, a deliberate choice to contrast with the garish modern chaos of the scandal. Isabella wore a simple cream cashmere dress. She was composed, her voice steady. There were no theatrics, no crocodile tears. There was only a woman determined to set the record straight. Clara began her questions gentle but probing. Isabella, the world saw an act of violence. What do you want the world to know now? Isabella looked directly into the camera. I want them to know that what they saw was not an act of domestic abuse in the way they understand it. It was the final tragic symptom of a sophisticated and cruel psychological attack against my husband, and by extension against me and our unborn child. The directness of the statement caught Clara off guard. Are you saying Julian Croft is the victim here? Julian is responsible for his actions, Isabella stated, her voice firm. He raised his hand to me, and that is something we will have to live with forever. It is a wound that may never heal. But he was not the sole architect of that moment. He was a puppet, and his strings were being pulled by a man named Damian Thorne. Over the next hour, Isabella, with Clara's expert guidance, laid out the facts. She spoke of Project Nightingale. She mentioned the compromised server, the tip from the loyal IT technician. She didn't have all the pieces, but she had enough to paint a damning picture of corporate espionage bleeding into personal warfare. But then came the moment that would change everything. There's one more thing, Isabella said, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. The foundation of this attack, I believe, was a lie about my baby. A lie designed to make my husband believe this child was not his. Clara leaned forward. And is it? Isabella looked into the camera again, her eyes unwavering. When Julian and I decided to have a child, we faced some difficulties. We used IVF to conceive. It was a private, deeply personal journey for us. She took a breath. As part of that process, our DNA, our genetic markers are all on file at the most reputable fertility clinic in the country, the Lister Hospital. They are irrefutable. She slid a sealed envelope across the table to Clara. That is a certified copy of the prenatal genetic report conducted 3 days ago. It confirms with 100% certainty that Julian Croft is the father of my child. The lie, whatever form it took, was a fabrication, and I am willing to have any independent doctor in the world verify it. This was the bombshell, not just a denial, but a scientifically proven refutation of the unspoken rumor that now hung over the scandal. The interview aired that evening. It didn't just change the narrative. It torched it. The public, so quick to condemn, was now faced with a far more complex and sinister story. The hashtag #CroftSlap was slowly being replaced by #Project Nightingale and #Damian Thorne. In his penthouse, Julian watched the interview transfixed. He saw Isabella not broken and weeping, but strong, intelligent, and fiercely protective of their child, of his child. He heard about the IVF, a secret they had kept so close, now laid bare to defend him. He heard about the compromised server, the fabricated lie about paternity. The paranoia that had encased him like a shroud was ripped away, and the truth was blinding. He wasn't a righteous man betrayed. He was a fool, a prized champion fool who had performed his trick for the whole world to see. He thought back to every conversation with Damian, every friendly warning, every piece of evidence. It was all so clear now. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The name Project Nightingale echoed in his mind. It was a name from his past. Years ago, in his first major business venture, he had outmaneuvered Damian Thorne to acquire a small but brilliant biotech firm. The firm's signature research project, a revolutionary gene sequencing technique, was codenamed Nightingale. Thorne had never forgiven him for it. This wasn't just revenge. It was poetry. Thorne had used the ghost of their first battle to win the last one. A fire Julian hadn't felt in years ignited in his gut. It wasn't the blind rage from the gala. It was a cold, focused fury. He had been played, his wife had been endangered, and his child had been used as a weapon. He picked up his phone and called the one man he knew was still loyal. The one man who operated in the shadows better than anyone. Marcus. Marcus Julian said, his voice deadly calm. "Cancel my leave of absence. We're going to work. I want you to find a man, a geneticist named Dr. Eris Thorne. Find out everything about him, his debts, his vices, his fears. And I want you to arrange a meeting for me with Damian Thorne. Not in an office. Somewhere he can't escape." Damian Thorne watched the interview from his own home, the Macallan glass frozen halfway to his lips. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. Isabella was supposed to disappear, a tragic footnote. She wasn't supposed to fight back with facts and evidence. His phone rang. It was his cousin Aris, his voice trembling with panic. "They know Damian. They're talking about a fabrication, the Lister Hospital. Their records are ironclad. We're ruined." "Calm down, you fool," Damian hissed, though his own heart was hammering against his ribs. "She has no proof connecting us to anything. It's her word against a ghost on the internet. Hold your nerve." But he knew it was too late. Isabella hadn't just cleared her name. She had given the world a new villain. And as the interview concluded with Clara Vance looking gravely at the camera and saying, "The question now is not what happened at the gala, but how far Damian Thorne was willing to go," he felt the first real tremor of fear. He had built a perfect trap for Julian Croft. He had just never considered that the bait might be the one to tear it all apart. Julian Croft had always understood that true power wasn't about shouting. It was about controlling the environment. For his confrontation with Damian Thorne, he chose the sky. The London Eye on a grey, drizzly weekday afternoon was nearly deserted. Marcus had booked an entire pod, citing a private corporate event. As the colossal wheel began its slow, silent ascent, the sprawling panorama of London unfolded below, a city that had witnessed both Julian's meteoric rise and his spectacular fall. Damian Thorne stepped into the pod just as the doors were closing, a look of wary curiosity on his face. He had come because the invitation was irresistible, a summons from a ghost. He expected to see a broken man. The man standing by the curved glass was not broken. Julian Croft was terrifyingly calm. The wild emotional rage of the gala was gone, replaced by an arctic stillness that was far more intimidating. Julian Damian began adopting his familiar tone of faux concern. "I was horrified when I heard. If there's anything I can do, save it. Damian." Julian cut him off, his voice low and even. He didn't turn to face him yet, continuing to gaze out at the city. Let's talk about Project Nightingale. The name hit Damian like a physical blow. He stiffened his carefully composed mask, twitching. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Julian finally turned his eyes, locking onto Damian's. It was a good name. Poetic. A callback to the first time I beat you. The first time I took something you thought was yours. You've been nursing that grudge for a decade, haven't you? The pod reached its apex, 135 meters above the ground. Below, the world looked like a map. They were suspended between the heavens and the earth in a glass bubble of truth. You found my weakness. Julian continued, taking a slow step forward. It wasn't money or power. It was pride. The fear that I wasn't good enough, that the life I had was too perfect, that I didn't deserve Isabella. And you played on it like a virtuoso. Damian's facade began to crack. You're delusional. Grief has clearly scrambled your mind. My mind is clearer than it has ever been, Julian countered. Let me tell you what I see. I see a man so consumed by envy that he decided to destroy a life rather than build his own. You couldn't beat me in the boardroom, so you crept into my home, into my marriage, into my head. He took another step. The pod was not large. There was nowhere for Damian to retreat. You hired your cousin, Dr. Thorne. Julian stated not as a question, but as a fact. A geneticist with a gambling problem and a mountain of debt. £100,000, was it? To falsify a DNA report, to make me believe my own child was a stranger growing inside the woman I love. Damian's face went pale. You have no proof. Proof. A small, cold smile touched Julian's lips. Proof is for courts. This is for me. Marcus found your cousin an hour ago at the Luton airport, trying to board a one-way flight to Macau. Dr. Thorne has a terrible fear of heights and enclosed spaces. He's a very talkative man when he's uncomfortable. He kept a copy of all your correspondence, by the way. An insurance policy. He signed a full confession half an hour ago. The last of Damian's composure shattered. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, terrified sheen. You can't prove anything in court. It's inadmissible. I don't need a court, Damian, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You wanted to see my empire fall. Well, you succeeded. My stock is in the gutter. The board has ousted me. My name is synonymous with disgrace. I have nothing left to lose. He gestured to the glass floor of the pod. We're a long way up. Accidents happen. A scuffle between two distraught business rivals. A tragic fall. The media would love that story, wouldn't they? It has a certain symmetry. Terror, pure and primal, flashed in Damian's eyes. He finally saw the man in front of him, not as the disgraced fool from the gala, but as a predator who had been stripped of everything but his rage. He stumbled backward, pressing himself against the far side of the pod. You're insane, he stammered. You made me this way, Julian said, his voice laced with cold fury. You turned my love into a weapon against me. You threatened my child. My wife had to go on international television and discuss the intimate details of our life just to undo the damage you caused. You didn't just attack my business, you defiled my family. Julian stood inches from him now. The silence in the pod was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the machinery and Damian's ragged breathing. Julian raised his hand, the same hand that had struck Isabella. Damian flinched violently, cowering like a dog. But Julian didn't strike him. He simply let his hand hang in the air for a moment before slowly lowering it. "Beating you would be a release. And you don't deserve one," Julian said, his voice filled with contempt. "Your punishment won't be a moment of pain. It will be a lifetime of it. The confession, the evidence, it's already been sent to the Serious Fraud Office, the Financial Conduct Authority, and every major news outlet on the planet. Your assets will be frozen by morning. Your reputation will be incinerated. Every friend you have will desert you. You'll be the pariah. You'll be me, but without the slightest chance of redemption." The pod began its descent. The view of London rushed back into focus. "Your revenge was a masterpiece of destruction, Damian. I'll give you that," Julian said, stepping back and turning to watch the city reappear. "But you forgot one thing. When you burn a man's entire world down, you've got to make sure he's in it. All you did was clear the land for me to build something new. Now get out of my sight." As the pod doors opened with a gentle hiss, Marcus was waiting. Damian Thorne, a man who had walked in radiating arrogance, stumbled out a ghost in a 1,000-pound suit. He didn't look at Julian. He walked zombie-like into the arms of two plain-clothed police officers who were waiting for him just beyond the barriers. Julian watched him go, feeling not satisfaction, but a profound emptiness. He had won the war, but the battle that truly mattered was yet to come. He had to face Isabella. The chosen location was a world away from the cold marble of courtrooms and the sterile glass of corporate offices. Julian met her in the Princess of Wales Conservatory at Kew Gardens. Outside, a typically grey and melancholic London sky wept a fine drizzle onto the manicured lawns. But inside the glasshouse, it was another world. The air was warm, thick, and alive with the humid scent of damp earth, exotic blossoms, and slow, patient growth. It was Isabella's choice, a neutral territory, a place of life to confront the death of their trust. Julian walked through the glass doors connecting the dry, arid zone to the tropical orchid display where she was waiting. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and suffocating. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the serene quiet of the conservatory. He had faced down hostile boards, ruthless competitors, and a global media firestorm. But that was all armor and artifice. This was different. This required a nakedness of the soul he wasn't sure he possessed. He saw her standing by a display of phalaenopsis orchids, their delicate, moth-like petals a stark white against the lush green foliage. She wasn't looking at him, but at the flowers, her profile silhouetted against the bright, diffused light of the glass panes. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress that did little to conceal the prominent, beautiful curve of her pregnancy. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore no jewelry. There was a stillness about her, a formidable serenity that was entirely new. The fragile, heart-broken woman from the Savoy was gone. In her place stood a queen in exile surveying the ruins of her kingdom with a sorrowful but unbreakable resolve. He stopped a dozen feet away, the distance feeling like an impassable chasm. Every rehearsed apology, every carefully constructed sentence he had prepared evaporated into the humid air. All that was left was the horrifying, simple truth of his failure. "Isa," he began his voice, a dry, unfamiliar rasp. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet space. She turned slowly. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw a flicker of the woman he had danced with in Tuscany, the woman whose laughter was his favorite sound. But it was immediately guarded, replaced by a calm, appraising look. It was the look of someone studying a historical artifact, trying to understand how something so precious could have been so thoroughly broken. There was no hatred in her eyes, which was somehow worse. Hatred was a fire you could fight. This was a deep, glacial sadness. I know he started again, forcing the words out. I know that the word sorry is an insult to what I did. It's a word for spilling coffee, not for shattering a life. My life. Your life. Ours. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands clenched at his sides to stop them from shaking. There is no excuse. I want you to hear that. There are reasons, a sickness in my own mind, a poison poured by another man. But there is no excuse. Damian Thorne didn't raise his hand to you. My pride did. My insecurity did. I did. I looked at you, the purest thing in my life, and I chose to believe a lie fabricated by the ugliest parts of the world. I chose to believe it over the evidence of every day I ever spent with you. That is my sin, and mine alone. He let the confession hang in the air, heavy and absolute. He didn't beg, didn't plead for understanding. He simply stated the truth of his guilt. Isabella listened, her expression unreadable. She walked slowly from the orchids to a simple wooden bench and sat down, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly. She looked at him for a long, silent moment before she spoke, her voice as quiet as the drizzle outside. Do you know what the worst part was, Julian? She asked, her voice steady, but laced with a profound tremor of memory. It wasn't the slap itself. The sting on my cheek was gone in an hour. The humiliation. That was a firestorm. But fires eventually burn out. The worst part, the part that plays in my mind when I try to sleep, was the 2 seconds before. It was the look in your eyes. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. I looked at my husband, the father of the child, moving inside me, and I saw a stranger. I saw a look of pure, undiluted hatred. You looked at me, at this baby, as if we were a contamination, a disease you needed to violently expel from your perfect life. In that moment, you didn't just hit at me. You erased me. You erased everything we had ever been. How do I ever unsee that? How does our child grow up knowing his father was capable of looking at his mother that way? Her questions weren't attacks. They were genuine points of inquiry from a soul in agony. And they pierced him more deeply than any shout could have. You can't, he whispered, the admission tearing at his throat. You can never unsee it. And I will spend every remaining day of my life trying to prove that the man you saw in that moment is dead. I killed him. Because if I don't, then I have no right to even breathe the same air as you and our child. He walked to the bench opposite her and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on it. The sound of it landing was definitive. I came here today not to ask for forgiveness. I have no right to it. I came to begin my atonement. He pushed the folder across the table. This is a legal transfer ratified this morning. Half of my entire personal fortune, everything that wasn't tied up in Nexus Dynamics, has been placed into an irrevocable trust. The beneficiaries are you and our child. It is yours, untouchable by me, by the company, by anyone. It is security. It is freedom. It is a pathetic attempt to repair a fissure in the universe, but it's the only tool I have. He then slid a single sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. It was his formal, undated resignation as CEO of Nexus Dynamics. The board wants me back. To them, the scandal is manageable now that Thorne is exposed. But their opinion doesn't matter. Only yours does. If you want me to walk away to disappear from public life entirely, I will sign this right now, and it's done. If you want me to stay to rebuild the company and secure a legacy for our child, I will do that. The power is yours, Isabella. I am surrendering it to you completely. You will decide my future. Isabella looked from the folder to the resignation letter and finally back to his face. She saw no manipulation there, only the raw, desolate landscape of a man who had finally understood the totality of his failure. "Power is what broke you, Julian," she said softly. "The fear of losing it. The arrogance of having it. I don't want that power." She pushed the resignation letter back towards him. "A legacy for our child needs a father, not a ghost. Rebuild it, but rebuild it as a better man." She took a deep breath. "I'm using some of the funds to start a foundation. I'm calling it the Nightingale Foundation. It will provide legal and psychological support for victims of complex harassment and reputational attacks. I'm taking the ugliest thing that ever happened to me, and I am turning it into a shield for other people." He could only nod, overwhelmed by her strength and grace. "But you cannot come home," she said, her voice gaining a new firmness. It was the final condition, the one that mattered most. "Not now. Maybe not for a very long time. I need to feel safe. Our child needs to be born into a house of peace, not a house of ghosts. I need to heal. And you are broken, Julian. You need to fix yourself. Not for me. For you. You will seek intensive therapy. You will excavate every dark, insecure corner of your soul. And you will understand, truly, understand why you were fertile ground for such poison. You will become a man who is stronger than his own pride. Until you are that man, you will be a visitor in your child's life. A loving, supportive, but distant one. It wasn't a life sentence, but it was a long and lonely exile. It was also just. It was merciful. It was more than he deserved. "I will," he vowed, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Anything. Whatever it takes." A fragile silence settled between them again. This time, Isabella broke it. She stood up and slowly walked towards him. He braced himself, not knowing what to expect. She stopped in front of him, and with a courage that stunned him, she reached out, took his hand, the same hand that had struck her, and gently placed it flat against her stomach. The warmth of her skin, of the life beneath it, was a shock to his system. And then it happened. A tiny, decisive, living pulse fluttered against his palm. A kick. His breath caught in his throat. A single tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He looked from his hand on her belly to her face. A faint, watery smile touched her lips, a mirror of his own. It was not a smile of joy or forgiveness, but one of shared, profound, and heart-breaking humanity. It was the first light after a long and terrible storm. The path to redemption was a vast, uncharted wilderness. But in that moment, with his hand on his wife and his child kicking within, he knew he had finally found the first step. The story of Julian and Isabella isn't just a drama about the rich. It's a powerful lesson about trust betrayal and the devastating impact of lies. It shows how even the strongest love can be poisoned from the outside. But it also reveals the incredible strength it takes to fight back, not with vengeance, but with truth. Their journey is far from over. Can a man who committed such a public sin ever truly atone for it? Can a woman's trust, once so completely shattered, ever be rebuilt? Their future, and the future of their child, hangs in the balance. What do you think? Should Isabella eventually forgive Julian completely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the most unexpected betrayals are the ones that shatter our entire reality. Picture a loving mother, a devoted wife stepping into the grand lobby of the Hyatt Regency in downtown Chicago, her pulse quickening at the thought of surprising her husband on his routine business trip. Yet instead of his welcoming embrace, she is greeted by a sight that rips her world apart. A tender kiss shared between him and a mysterious woman in a sleek black coat. In that single heart-stopping moment, everything changes. Secrets spill into the open heart's break, and as a new chapter begins, it unfolds into a storm of regret, revenge, and the ultimate fight for hope. Emma Davenport woke to the sound of her alarm clock vibrating stubbornly on the bedside table, its gentle buzzing a relentless reminder of the hectic day ahead. She blinked herself awake momentarily, disoriented by the early dawn light cutting through the thin curtains. For a moment, she simply lay there taking in the comforting smell of fresh linen and the faint lemony tang of the cleaning spray she always used. Next to her, the bed was cold and empty. Mark had left for Chicago the previous afternoon, attending yet another financial conference as part of his ever-demanding job at Harper & Green Investments. Their 3-year-old daughter Lily stirred in the next room. Emma could hear the soft hum of a lullaby, playing from the child's nightlight, a small giraffe that projected stars onto the ceiling. She swung her legs off the bed and headed to Lily's room, her mind already flipping through the day's tasks. She planned to surprise Mark in Chicago that evening. Over the last few months, an uneasy feeling had gnawed at her, a suspicion she kept pushing aside. While Mark claimed to be overwhelmed with work, she wanted to see for herself if everything was really as he said. She scooped Lily into her arms, inhaling the sweet baby shampoo in her daughter's hair. A wave of resolve swept over her. For years, she had trusted Mark blindly. He was the calm, steady presence in her life, a man who made time for bedtime stories and neighborhood barbecues even as he rose through the ranks of his firm. Yet something had changed. It was in the way he avoided her eyes at the dinner table, in the vague excuses he made after late-night phone calls. Emma needed clarity, and she was determined to get it. Despite her growing worries, Emma couldn't forget the man who once charmed her with fresh daisies on their first date. In the early days, Mark was her everything. They had met by chance at an art gallery in downtown Seattle, introduced by mutual acquaintances. Emma had been immediately drawn to his warm laugh and quiet confidence. They shared a passion for exploring museums, volunteering at local charities, and dreaming of a future filled with travel love and children. But as Mark climbed higher in his career, work trips became the norm. It started slowly, a day trip to Los Angeles, a 2-night conference in Boston. Emma had brushed off any concerns back then, reminding herself that she had married a man with ambition. His success was their success. But with each promotion, Mark's job demands soared. His phone was forever buzzing with new messages. His eyes flickered with tension whenever she asked questions. A month ago, Emma found a receipt in Mark's coat pocket from the St. Regis Hotel in Chicago. It was for a lavish dinner for 2. Mark had told her it was merely a networking meal with a prospective client named Mr. Townsend. Yet the scrawled signature on the receipt wasn't Mark's handwriting. Alarm bells rang in Emma's mind, but she was too afraid to push him, afraid of what she might learn. In the back of her mind, she clung to a fragile hope that there was an innocent explanation. That morning, as she kissed Lily goodbye and entrusted her to the care of her mother, Linda Pierce, Emma's nerves twisted in her stomach. She told herself she was just going to surprise Mark, to remind him that his family was right here, waiting and loving him. She prayed that her doubts were unfounded, and that by nightfall they would be laughing about her silly suspicions. She had no idea that what she would witness in a few short hours would change everything. The drive from their suburban home in Lake Forest to Chicago was typically just over an hour, but traffic stretched it to nearly 2. Emma found herself tapping her fingers anxiously on the steering wheel, eyes flicking to the clock every few minutes. She had planned her arrival to coincide with Mark's break between conference sessions. The plan was simple: appear in the hotel lobby around 7 in the evening. Text him to meet her by the grand staircase and greet him with a heartfelt kiss. She hoped the spontaneity would reignite the spark that had dwindled over the past year. As she navigated the bustling city streets, Emma remembered how much she used to love Chicago. She had attended college here years ago and always found an unmatched energy in its towering skyline. Now the once exciting metropolis felt daunting, its tall buildings pressing in on her. She turned onto Michigan Avenue, weaving through throngs of pedestrians. With every mile, her heart pounded faster. She parked in an underground garage and made her way to the Hyatt Regency, an enormous structure that soared above the city. Emma swiped a bit of lipstick across her lips, checked her reflection in the mirrored panels near the revolving doors, and took a calming breath. She tried not to let her anxious thoughts overshadow her intentions. If she was going to face Mark, it had to be with confidence. Clutching her purse, she stepped into the grand lobby with its marble floors and lofty ceilings. She could almost imagine Mark's surprised grin, the way he'd lift her up in a twirl. But as she scanned the opulent space, she didn't see him at the lounge or by the registration desk. Instead, she saw something else, something that made her freeze in her tracks. There near the bar area, under soft golden lights, sat Mark. He wasn't alone. A woman with dark, cascading hair leaned close, her hand resting intimately on his arm. Emma's brain struggled to process what she was seeing. For a second, she prayed it was some misunderstanding. Perhaps this was a colleague, and they were discussing business details. But then Mark turned to the woman, and their lips met in a slow, unmistakably romantic kiss. Emma felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Numbness washed over her entire body. Her feet rooted to the spot, and it was as if the rest of the world faded away, leaving only the horrifying sight of her husband kissing a stranger. It was surreal, like a bad dream from which she couldn't wake. She stood there not more than 20 feet away, unnoticed by Mark. The woman, elegantly dressed in a fitted black coat, pulled back and gazed adoringly at him. Emma recognized that look. It was the look of someone deeply involved. She realized with acute clarity that this wasn't just a casual fling. This was something that had been going on long enough for them to appear entirely at ease in public. Tears pricked the back of her eyes, but fury overcame her shock. How dare he do this here so blatantly? She wanted to stride across the lobby, slap him, make a scene. 1,000 impulses warred in her mind. Heartbreak, anger, confusion, and the fragile remains of her dignity. Ultimately, she took a shaking breath and backed away, retreating into the shadows of the expansive corridor, leaving Mark and his mistress, who for now remained oblivious to Emma's presence. Emma didn't remember how she got from the hotel to the street. One moment, she was inside that marble lobby, watching Mark betray her. The next, she was stumbling onto the sidewalk, swallowing lungfuls of the frigid Chicago air. Her phone buzzed in her purse, but she couldn't bring herself to look at it. If it was Mark, she didn't want to talk to him. If it was anyone else, she couldn't summon the strength to explain what she'd just witnessed. For what felt like hours, she wandered aimlessly along the streets, tears streaming down her cheeks. She replayed the scene in her head over and over, each iteration stabbing deeper than the last. Glimpses of their life together flashed before her eyes. Mark's smile on their wedding day, the time he wept with joy when Lily was born, the nights he would scoop her into his arms and promise her the world. How could that same man now be kissing another woman without remorse? Eventually, she found herself standing near a small park, the lights from a nearby cafe illuminating the tears on her face. She sank onto a bench and let her emotions course through her. Anger flared white-hot, mingling with heartbreak. She wanted answers, yet the thought of confronting Mark right now was too much to bear. Her phone buzzed again. Summoning her nerve, she pulled it out to see a text from her mother Linda, who asked, "How's the surprise going? Is Mark excited?" Lily's asking for her daddy. Emma's gut twisted as she read the words. How could she ever explain this to Lily? She typed a quick, shaky reply. "Not great. I'll be home soon." Then she hailed a taxi back to her car, her mind already plotting her next move. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She paced the living room, waiting for Mark to return from Chicago. She had no intention of revealing she had gone there to see him. Let him try to lie his way out. First, she wanted to see how deep his betrayal would go. Around midnight, Mark finally strode into the house with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and the faint smell of hotel soap clinging to his skin. "Hey, honey," he greeted, sounding casual, almost loving, as though nothing was amiss. "Conference ran late. You didn't have to wait up." Emma forced a tight smile. "I wanted to see you," she replied coolly. In truth, she was marveling at his ability to pretend. Her heart hammered against her ribcage, and she felt the urge to scream at him to demand he'd tell her the truth. But she waited, letting the tension build between them. Mark went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and offered Emma one as well. As he turned around, she fixed him with a steady gaze. "Did you have dinner with Mr. Townsend again?" she asked, voice trembling lightly. He hesitated, eyes flicking away for the briefest moment before returning to hers. "Yeah," he lied smoothly. It was all business, just like before. Emma's anger flared at the blatant untruth. She clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She could feel her composure crumbling. Suddenly she snapped. "Stop lying to me, Mark. I saw you." His glass of water slipped from his fingers, shattering on the tile floor. For a moment, neither of them moved. The confession hung in the air heavier than the tension that preceded it. "Saw me," he whispered, face draining of color. Emma gulped a shaky breath, eyes brimming with tears. "I was at the Hyatt tonight. I saw you with her." She spat the final word with venom, each syllable echoing with betrayal. Mark's mind whirred as he scrambled to regain control of the situation. Emma watched his expressions shift from shock to denial, then to something like desperation. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally managed. "It's not what you think." Emma laughed a harsh, broken sound. "Oh, really? Because it looked like you and that woman were pretty cozy," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "Is she your mistress?" Mark raked a hand through his hair. She's Veronica Graham," he admitted, voice low. She's a colleague from the firm. We've been seeing each other. Emma's stomach lurched, and she turned away, unable to look at him. Of all the words she expected to hear, his direct admission of guilt was both validating and soul-crushing. Why, she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and hurt. Why would you do this to us? He took a faltering step forward, only to stop when he saw her recoil. It just happened. Mark tried, his voice shaking. I've been under a lot of stress. Veronica understands my work. She's there late at night, pulling the same hours, dealing with the same pressures. Don't! Emma hissed, tears streaking her face. Don't you dare reduce this to stress and late nights. We have a child, Mark. We had a life. He wiped a hand across his face. I never stopped loving you, he insisted. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. That's a convenient word, she spat, and one that doesn't mean much now. You think you can just come back, say it was a mistake, and everything is fine. She turned away again, her voice dropping to a pained whisper. I trusted you. Mark tried to speak, but she cut him off with a trembling hand. It's too late for apologies. You made your choice. With that, she fled to their bedroom, leaving him alone in the kitchen, shards of broken glass and cold water pooling around his feet, a fitting metaphor for the ruin of their marriage. Emma had always believed she could handle anything if she and Mark faced it together. But that night, as she curled into a tight ball on their bed, she realized she was on her own. The magnitude of his betrayal crushed her. The man she thought she knew inside and out had been leading a double life. How could she ever trust him again? Throughout the night, Emma wrestled with her thoughts. She heard Mark downstairs making phone calls, likely to Veronica. She wondered if he was telling her that Emma knew. The idea of them discussing her pain so casually left her furious and humiliated. She knew she couldn't stay in that house, playing the role of dutiful wife while Mark sorted out his affair. When Lily's soft cries broke the silence at dawn, Emma rose mechanically. She realized with sudden clarity what she had to do. She needed to leave. Emma's first priority was her daughter, protecting her from the fallout of this nightmare. As Lily's innocent eyes opened, Emma forced a reassuring smile onto her face, but inside her heart was in shreds. Once Lily was fed and dressed, Emma scribbled a short note for Mark. I'm taking Lily away for a while. Don't follow us. We need space. She set the note on the kitchen counter, next to the shards of broken glass that still lay there from the night before Mark hadn't even bothered to clean them up. It was symbolic, she realized, of how little he cared for order, now that his secret was out. Emma packed a suitcase, taking only essentials. She called her mother, but Linda didn't pick up. She didn't leave a voicemail. She wanted to make her move before Mark woke up. Give herself a head start. Within half an hour, Emma had Lily strapped into the back seat of the car and was pulling away from the life she had known. She drove eastward, not entirely sure where she was going. Emma had distant relatives in Michigan, an aunt named Eleanor, who'd moved to a lakeside property near Traverse City. It was a place Emma had visited a few times in childhood. Aunt Eleanor and Emma's mother had never been close, but Emma remembered her aunt as a kind, if somewhat reserved woman. With no other plan in mind, Emma dialed the number she found in an old address book tucked away in the glove compartment. To her relief, Eleanor picked up on the second ring, after a hasty explanation that left out most details. Emma asked if she and Lily could stay for a while. We just need to get away, she confessed in a trembling voice. Despite years of little contact, Eleanor hesitated only for a moment before agreeing. The promise of a temporary haven calmed Emma's racing heart. She pressed down on the accelerator, determined to put as much distance as possible between them and Mark. Lily dozed in the back seat, hugging her little stuffed elephant. Every now and then Emma glanced in the rear-view mirror, tears stinging her eyes. She felt guilty uprooting Lily's life, but she believed she was protecting her daughter from the emotional storm. For now, at least they would be safe in a remote lakeside cottage, away from the chaos Mark's actions had unleashed. As the cityscape gave way to open highway, and then rolling farmland, Emma's thoughts drifted to what would happen next. She had no clear plan. The heartbreak was too fresh to think about lawyers or custody battles. But one thing was sure: she would not let Mark's betrayal define her or harm Lily. If he wanted to keep playing the role of an unfaithful husband, he would do it alone. Mark awoke in an empty house. The silence, usually comforting after a long trip, felt suffocating. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at his phone. No new messages from Emma. Confusion prickled at his mind. Normally Lily would be chattering in the living room, or Emma would have breakfast ready. He rolled out of bed, the events of the previous night seeping back into his consciousness like a poison. He found Emma's note on the kitchen counter. His stomach lurched as he read it. "I'm taking Lily away for a while. Don't follow us. We need space." Shock turned to panic. She was gone, and she had taken Lily. Mark ran a hand through his hair, guilt and fear swirling together. He reached for his phone, dialing Emma's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried Linda's number, hoping her mother would have some information, but Linda sounded just as alarmed when Mark mentioned Emma's disappearance. "What do you mean she's gone?" Linda demanded. "She left Lily with me yesterday morning. Now you're saying she took Lily away." When Mark's stunned silence answered her question well enough, and Linda hung up in anger, promising to find her daughter, Mark paced the house like a trapped animal, scanning for any sign of where Emma might have gone. He scoured her desk drawers, the bedroom closet, even the attic. There was no clue. All he found were the heart-breakingly empty spaces where Emma's clothes had been. The realization that she had planned this departure, packed Lily's things, wrote the note, and left without looking back, crushed him. He knew he had done this. He was the one who'd introduced deceit into their marriage, and now, facing the consequences, the depth of his regret began to sink in. But regret wouldn't bring Emma back. If he wanted to salvage anything, he would have to take drastic steps to win back his family's trust, assuming Emma would even give him the chance. Days stretched into a week, and still Emma did not return. Mark reached out to everyone he could think of: mutual friends, acquaintances, even distant relatives, but no one knew where Emma and Lily might be. In a moment of desperation, Mark confided in his best friend and co-worker, James Overton. James's advice was blunt. "You need a lawyer." Reluctantly, Mark scheduled an appointment with Rebecca Slater, a top family law attorney in Chicago. Sitting in her sleek office with floor-to-ceiling windows, Mark felt exposed and vulnerable. Rebecca studied him from behind her large mahogany desk, her expression unreadable. "So your wife left," she stated, scanning over the initial paperwork he had filled out, "and she took your child with her. Have you received any official communication regarding a divorce or custody arrangement?" Mark shook his head. "No. She left a note. That's it." "I've tried calling, texting, no response." Rebecca folded her hands. "Did you give her cause?" Mark's face burned. He cleared his throat. I had an affair." She found out. Rebecca nodded her gaze, never wavering. Infidelity can certainly precipitate drastic actions. "Look, We can file a petition for a formal custody arrangement, but if she hasn't filed for divorce yet, it's a bit tricky. Are you sure you want to go down that path immediately? Sometimes it escalates things beyond repair. Mark hesitated, tears pricking the corners of his eyes. All he truly wanted was to fix things with Emma, to apologize, to beg her forgiveness. But Emma was gone, and he had no idea how to reach her. "I just want to see my daughter," he whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." Rebecca's face softened slightly. "Let's hold off on immediate legal action. I'll do some private searching, see if we can find out where she might be staying. Once we know that, you can decide how to proceed. In the meantime, gather financial statements, property details, everything." Mark left her office feeling more lost than ever. He had set a ruinous ball in motion by kissing Veronica that night in the hotel lobby, by allowing their affair to blossom in the first place. Now, with Emma and Lily vanished, he realized the gaping void where his family used to be. For the first time, the possibility of never seeing them again crushed him beyond measure. Emma found a quiet solace in Aunt Eleanor's lakeside home. The weather was beginning to warm, melting the last patches of snow around the cabin's perimeter. Lily, oblivious to the drama unfolding, loved splashing at the shoreline with her tiny boots. She giggled when the cold water touched her toes and made a game of collecting shiny pebbles. Aunt Eleanor was an enigma. She did not pry for details about Emma's sudden arrival. Instead, she offered the comforts of home warm meals, a cozy bedroom, and an ample supply of patient understanding. Emma was grateful for the sanctuary. When she couldn't sleep at night, she'd wander down to the dock, staring out at the moonlit lake. The stillness of the water mirrored her new sense of limbo, not quite sure where she was headed, but certain she couldn't go back to the life she left. One evening, Aunt Eleanor joined Emma on the dock, handing her a steaming mug of tea. They stood in silence for a while, the night breeze rippling across the lake's surface. Finally, Eleanor spoke in her measured, quiet voice. "I don't need to know everything that happened, dear, but I can see the pain in your eyes." Emma nodded, tears brimming. "He cheated," she said, simply. "I saw him, there's no doubt." Aunt Eleanor inhaled slowly. "I'm so sorry," she replied, setting a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "I'd never presume to tell you what to do, but know that if you need time, or if you need someone to lean on, I'm here." Emma exhaled shakily. "I just can't believe he'd throw away our family like that. Now I'm afraid of the future. Afraid he'll try to take Lily, or that I'll never be able to stand on my own 2 feet again." Eleanor's gaze was firm, yet kind. "Emma, you're stronger than you think. Start with today. Focus on what you need right now to keep yourself and Lily safe and stable." Over the following weeks, Emma took on small tasks to help Eleanor around the property. She found a moment of peace in the rhythm of raking leaves and planting new flowers. Lily thrived on the freedom chasing after butterflies and squealing with delight whenever a duck paddled near the shore. The constant ache of betrayal was still there, but day by day, Emma felt a small kernel of strength grow within her. While Emma and Lily found an uneasy peace in Michigan, Mark's mistress Veronica, Graham, was facing her own challenges. In the aftermath of Emma's disappearance, Mark had distanced himself from Veronica, plagued by guilt and worry. Their once passionate affair, fueled by late-night strategy sessions and stolen kisses in the office corridor, had begun to sour under the weight of real-life consequences. Veronica was no stranger to ambition. She thrived in the fast-paced environment of Harper and Green Investments. But rumors circulated quickly in corporate hallways. Whispers of the married Mark Davenport's affair reached many ears, and it didn't take long for people to link it to Veronica. The sly looks and hushed judgments weighed on her every time she walked into the office. She confronted Mark about his sudden coldness one evening when he agreed to meet her at a discreet cafe near their workplace. "I feel like you're punishing me for something." "We both chose," Veronica said, frustration evident in her voice. Mark rubbed his forehead. He looked tired, older somehow. "I'm not punishing you," he insisted. I'm worried about Emma and Lily." "She's gone, Veronica. I have no clue where she is. And it's my fault." Veronica reached out to take his hand, but Mark pulled away. The rejection stung. "You can't blame yourself entirely," she tried. "We both knew what we were doing. Emma finding out, well, that was never going to be clean or easy." Mark stared into his coffee cup. "That doesn't help," he said, voice hollow. "I need to make this right, but I don't even know how. Everything is a mess." Realizing the rift that had formed, Veronica felt resentment rise within her. She had risked her reputation and emotional well-being for a man who now seemed bent on retreating into his guilt. Still, she clung to the hope that she and Mark could weather the storm. After all, their bond went beyond mere lust, or so she believed. Frustrated by Rebecca Slater's slow progress and desperate for answers, Mark hired a private investigator named Jason Rudd. Jason came highly recommended by James Overton, who had once used him for a sensitive corporate matter. Though Mark felt uneasy about spying on his own wife, he rationalized that he had no other choice if he wanted to see Lily again. Jason was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and penetrating eyes. He listened intently as Mark recounted the night Emma left the note and the total lack of communication since. "She's not using her credit cards or her phone. At least I can't trace anything," Mark explained anxiously. Jason nodded. "She's being cautious. Likely she's using cash or a secondary bank account you're not aware of." He tapped a pen against his notepad. "Any family she might rely on. Friends outside your circle." Mark thought about Emma's mother, but Linda didn't seem to know anything. Then he remembered Emma's father had passed away years ago. She has an aunt, I think, on her mother's side. Eleanor something. They weren't very close. Jason jotted down the name. Eleanor. "That's a start." He handed Mark a stack of forms. "Sign these. I'll check phone records, any property ownership under that name. It might take a while, but we'll find them." As Mark complied, his heart pounded with conflicting emotions. Hiring a PI felt like a violation of Emma's privacy, but the alternative, doing nothing, left him paralyzed. The memory of her tear-streaked face the night she confronted him sliced through his guilt. He told himself he was doing this for Lily's sake, to be a father again, to fix what he'd broken. A small part of him feared what he'd say if he actually found Emma. Could they repair the marriage? Would she ever forgive him? Each question led to more uncertainty. Yet, Mark pushed forward, fueled by desperation. Weeks passed in Michigan. Emma's life fell into a quiet, routine breakfast with Aunt Eleanor, and Lily walks by the lake, occasional trips to the small town for groceries. She had saved enough money to sustain them for a while, and Aunt Eleanor refused any rent payments, insisting Emma's presence was enough. Still, Emma knew she couldn't hide forever. She spent her nights reading about divorce laws, spousal support, and child custody. The words swam before her tired eyes, overwhelming her with legal jargon. She jotted questions in a notebook, hoping to someday get real legal advice. One afternoon, Emma received a phone call on the new prepaid cell phone she had purchased under a false name. To her surprise, it was Linda Pierce, her mother. Emma froze, torn between her desire to talk to the woman who raised her and her fear that Mark might be tracking their communication. "Mum," Emma whispered, stepping out onto the cabin's porch. "Oh, thank God," Linda exclaimed, relief evident in her voice. "Emma, are you all right? Mark told me you left, but he doesn't know where you are." Emma hesitated, tears springing to her eyes. She missed her mother desperately, but she also feared that Linda might share her location with Mark. "We're safe," she managed. "I can't tell you where, though." "Not yet." Linda sniffled. "I won't force you, but please know I'm worried." "Lily is okay." "She's fine, Mum. She's healthy and happy." Emma looked toward the lake where Lily was chasing after a butterfly. He betrayed me, Mum. I can't go back. Not now." "I understand," Linda replied. "I don't know what to think of Mark anymore. He seems genuinely torn up. But this is your decision, dear. Just promise me you'll stay in touch. I won't tell him anything you don't want me to." Emma allowed herself a tiny measure of comfort. "Thank you, Mum. I'll call again soon." As the call ended, Emma felt a strange combination of relief and guilt. She had reconnected with her mother, but she still felt guilty for cutting off Mark entirely. Yet every time she pictured him with that other woman, the heartbreak flared anew. She reminded herself she was protecting Lily, and she had no obligation to rush back into Mark's arms. Back in Chicago, Jason Rudd's investigation bore fruit. He discovered that a certain Eleanor Pierce owned a modest lakeside property near Traverse City, Michigan. Public records indicated a recent utility spike, suggesting new occupants. Jason presented his findings to Mark in a manila envelope one morning at a discreet coffee shop. "This is likely where your wife is staying," Jason said matter-of-factly. "Based on what I've gathered, she's been there for at least a few weeks." Mark's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. A property deed with Eleanor Pierce's name, some bank transactions for groceries, a few photographs of Emma's car, parked discreetly off the main road. Guilt and hope twisted together in his chest. She was within driving distance, alive and well with Lily. "What do I do now?" Mark asked quietly. Jason shrugged. "That's your call. Legally, you can attempt to force her to return, or at least negotiate custody. But if you truly want to reconcile, showing up with a court order might not be the best approach." Mark swallowed hard, thinking of Emma's tearful face. "I just want to see my daughter," he repeated. "I want Emma to know how sorry I am." Jason gave him a curt nod. "Then go. But I'd advise you do it gently." Fueled by this revelation, Mark set out that same afternoon. The drive seemed endless, his thoughts a maelstrom. Would Emma slam the door in his face? Would she let Lily see him? Did he even deserve forgiveness? Each mile brought him closer to answers he might not be ready to hear. Late evening shadows stretched across the gravel road as Mark pulled up to the address Jason had provided. The cottage stood near the water's edge, lights glowing softly inside. Mark parked a short distance away, heart pounding in his ears. He approached the front porch, his mouth dry as sand. His footsteps sounded unnaturally loud on the wooden steps. Before he could knock, the door swung open, revealing Aunt Eleanor. She regarded him calmly, her lips a thin line of disapproval. "Mark," she said, voice cool. "I knew you'd come eventually." He nodded, swallowing hard. "May I see Emma?" Eleanor stepped aside, but didn't invite him in. "I'll get her. Wait here." Moments later, Emma appeared in the doorway. Her face paled at the sight of him, and she instinctively turned to check on Lily, who was napping in another room. Closing the door behind her, she joined him on the porch, crossing her arms protectively over her chest. How did you find us?" she demanded, voice trembling with anger. Mark clenched and unclenched his fists. "I had to. I hired a PI. Emma, I'm sorry." "Sorry," she repeated bitterly. "You come here with a private investigator's evidence spying on me and say you're sorry." He blinked back tears. "I couldn't just do nothing. Emma, please. I had to see Lily. I'm not here to take her away. I want to see my daughter. And I want to talk. Can we please talk?" Emma stared at him, her emotions warring across her face. She glanced back at the cottage where Aunt Eleanor hovered in the doorway. Finally, she exhaled. "Fine. But Lily is asleep, and I don't want you waking her. We'll talk on the dock." Mark nodded, following her across the small yard to the lakeside dock. The moonlight reflected off the water, casting an ethereal glow over the surface. They stopped at the edge, the gentle sound of lapping waves filling the tension between them. They stood in silence for a moment, before Mark spoke, his voice cracking. "I've been going crazy not knowing where you were, if you were safe." Emma's jaw tightened. "I'm safe enough," she replied, her gaze fixed on the dark water. "And Lily is fine too. No thanks to you." Mark swallowed the lump in his throat. "I deserve that. Emma, I don't know if it helps, but I ended things with Veronica. I told her it's over. I'm willing to quit my job if that's what it takes to show you I'm serious about our marriage." Emma turned to look at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Our marriage?" she echoed. "You broke our marriage the moment you slept with her. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for me to see you two together in that lobby?" His own eyes grew misty. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I was an idiot. I got caught up in the pressures of work, the excitement there's no excuse. I just want a chance to make it right." Emma laughed bitterly, tears spilling over. "Make it right? How, Mark? You expect me to pretend this never happened, to forget the image of you kissing her?" Her voice shook with anger. "You lied to me. You lied about business trips, about dinners with Mr. Townsend. You chose her over us. I never chose her over you." Mark insisted, his words tumbling out. "I was confused." Emma raised a trembling hand, stopping him. "That's the thing, Mark. You did choose her every time you went to her hotel room or stayed late at the office for those so-called meetings. Now it's too late to say it was a mistake. The damage is done." Mark's breath hitched. "Do you hate?" Emma's tears fell in earnest. "I hate what you've done. I hate that I have to look at Lily and know you betrayed us." She shook her head. "But I'm also hurt, and part of me still loves you. I hate that the most." A choking sob escaped Mark's lips. He reached out to her, but she stepped back. They stood there raw and wounded under the moonlight, an unbridgeable chasm between them. Their conversation stretched into the late hours. Emma refused to let Mark inside the cottage, but she eventually relented to his request to see Lily in the morning. They sat under the starlight, discussing logistics, how Mark might visit without driving Emma away for good, how to handle finances in the interim. When Emma finally slipped back into the cottage, Mark slept fitfully in his car. His mind reeled from the confrontation, from Emma's tearful rage, from the faint glimmer of hope that she had not declared outright that their marriage was over. At dawn, Lily's voice roused Emma from sleep. The child was excited to see the ducks on the lake, babbling in her toddler speak. Emma's heart clenched, knowing Mark was waiting just outside. She made a quick decision and led Lily to the porch. There Mark stood with dark circles under his eyes and a weary smile. "Hi, sweetheart," he said softly, crouching down to Lily's eye level. The child looked unsure, hugging Emma's leg. For a moment, heartbreak flickered across Mark's face. He reached out gently, and Lily hesitated before stepping forward. "Daddy missed you," he whispered, pulling her into a delicate hug. Emma watched, tears brimming again. She reminded herself that Lily deserved a father, even if he was flawed. That tiny moment of reunion was enough to tear at Emma's carefully constructed wall. Part of her wanted to lash out and push him away. Another part wanted to bury her face in his chest to recall the warmth of the man she had loved. They spent a tense half-hour together, Mark helping Lily feed the ducks. Emma standing off to the side, arms folded protectively. When Lily asked if Daddy was coming home, Emma felt the sting of tears once again. She shook her head silently, unable to speak. Mark glanced at her, his eyes filled with regret. "Let's take this one step at a time," he murmured, more to Emma than to Lily. She gave him a curt nod, swallowing the pain, and hoping for Lily's sake that they could find a way to coexist, whatever that might look like. Over the following days, Mark rented a small cabin in the same area, a few miles down the lake. Emma allowed him carefully supervised visits with Lily, ensuring the child didn't suffer the sting of confusion or broken promises. It was an uneasy truce. Emma refused to discuss a permanent reconciliation. Her wounds were still too fresh. But she also didn't push for an immediate divorce, torn between her lingering love for Mark and her deep-seated anger. Aunt Eleanor silently observed the delicate dance between them, offering Emma private words of support, but never overstepping. She saw the torment in Emma's eyes and recognized the complexity of heartbreak, betrayal, and love colliding. Occasionally, Emma and Mark found themselves talking about mundane things, Lily's bedtime routines, her favorite songs, or what she ate for lunch. These trivial exchanges felt odd, yet somehow comforting. They were a reminder of the normalcy they once shared. Meanwhile, Mark's guilt weighed heavily. He kept his distance, respecting Emma's boundary. Each time he saw Lily's face light up at his arrival, he felt a dual pang of joy and despair. Would he ever be fully forgiven? Or was he doomed to this half-life, desperately clinging to fatherhood, while Emma rebuilt her own world without him? A month into this arrangement, Veronica made an unannounced appearance. She had tracked Mark's sudden absence from work, discovered his leads about Emma's location, and decided to confront him. Her arrival sent shockwaves through the fragile peace Emma and Mark had established. Veronica showed up at Mark's rented cabin, her eyes blazing with anger and betrayal. "You haven't returned my calls or texts," she spat. "I had to find you on my own. So this is where you ran off to playing house with your wife again?" Mark stiffened. "It's not like that," he tried to explain. "Veronica, I told you it's over. Emma and Lily are my family. I'm trying to fix things." Veronica let out a scornful laugh. "Fix things? You think you can just walk away from me, from everything we shared?" She gestured around. "Did you expect me to just vanish so you could rebuild your perfect suburban life?" Mark felt a surge of irritation mixed with shame. "We made a mistake," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm owning up to it now. There's nothing more to say." Unfortunately, Emma had arrived at that exact moment, intending to drop Lily off for a short visit. She froze at the sight of Veronica, her heart pounding with renewed fury. The scene was all too much, a vicious reminder of the betrayal that had driven her here in the first place. Veronica turned at the sound of Emma's footsteps, her stare turning icy. "So this is the woman you ran away to," she said, her tone dripping with contempt. Isn't it ironic? Emma, you ran, he chased you, and now the mistress is left behind. Before Emma could respond, Mark stepped forward. Veronica, that's enough. This is between me and Emma. But Emma couldn't hold back her outrage. She marched up to Veronica, voice trembling. Don't you dare twist this. You tore our marriage apart, and now you have the nerve to come here. Veronica's eyes flashed. Your marriage was already in trouble, sweetheart. That's why Mark was with me in the first place. Emma's hand flew before she could stop herself, slapping Veronica hard across the face. Veronica staggered back, eyes wide with shock. Lily, who was strapped into a car seat behind Emma, began to cry at the commotion. Mark rushed to intervene. Tears burned in Emma's eyes. She realized how easily the veneer of civility had shattered. With a shaking breath, she turned to Mark. This is exactly why I left, she said through gritted teeth. There's no peace with you. It's all lies and chaos. And in that moment, Emma vowed she would finalize her decision. It was time to end this toxic circle and protect herself and her child once and for all. That evening, Emma called a divorce attorney in Traverse City named Michael Sanders, recommended by a local acquaintance. She explained her situation, the betrayal, her temporary residence, and her desire to protect Lily. Michael listened patiently, then laid out her options. Given your circumstances, we can file here in Michigan, provided you establish residency, he explained. But typically, jurisdiction could be contested by your husband if he files in Illinois. We'll need to act carefully to ensure your rights and Lily's interests are protected. Emma nodded, her hands trembling around the phone. She felt a strange clarity settle over her, like a burden lifting off her shoulders. She would no longer hide. She would fight for her daughter's stability and for her own future. The next day, she met Michael in person. His office was modest but tidy, and Emma found his demeanor reassuring. She handed him a stack of notes and documents she had painstakingly compiled, evidence of Mark's infidelity financial records, Lily's birth certificate. I have to do this, she said, voice wavering. I can't live in this in-between anymore. Michael patted her hand. You're making a brave choice. We'll file the necessary paperwork. Be prepared your husband may contest it, and the process might get messy. But I'll guide you every step of the way. Emma exhaled. Thank you, she whispered, tears hovering in her eyes. I want peace. For Lily and for myself. When Mark received the divorce papers by courier at his rented cabin, a wave of nausea nearly knocked him off balance. Even though he suspected this outcome, seeing it in black and white was a shock. The words hammered home the finality of what was happening. He hurried to Emma's cottage, ignoring the voice in his head that told him she might slam the door in his face. Aunt Eleanor answered her disapproval as evident as ever, but she allowed him to step inside when he begged for a moment of Emma's time. In the living room, Emma stood with her hands folded, her expression resigned. You got the papers, she said calmly. Mark lifted the manila envelope. Is this really what you want? Emma swallowed, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to shed. I don't see any other way. You cheated on me, Mark, and then you brought all that chaos here. I can't expose Lily to that kind of turmoil. She deserves better. He sank onto the sofa, shaking his head. I know I messed up. I don't expect you to forgive me easily. But can't we try counseling or a trial separation? Do we have to go straight to divorce? Emma softened for a second, her gaze drifting to the hallway where Lily was playing. I wish I could say yes, she murmured. But we tried coexisting. Look what happened. Veronica showed up and it all fell apart again. I can't keep living like this, Mark. My heart is broken. I need to move on. Mark felt tears sting his eyes. What about custody? He asked, his voice trembling. I don't want to lose Lily. Emma's jaw tightened. We'll figure out an arrangement. She needs her father, but not if it means I'm constantly in agony. Mark nodded, tears slipping down his face. I understand. He stood clutching the divorce papers as though they weighed 1,000 pounds. Before leaving, he managed a broken whisper. I'm sorry, Emma. I love you. I always will. She didn't respond as he walked out the door. Only after he left did Emma allow herself the luxury of sinking to the floor, sobbing quietly, while Aunt Eleanor gently stroked her hair. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal filings, mediation sessions, and tense negotiations. Emma insisted on primary custody of Lily, with Mark allowed scheduled visitation. Despite his initial resistance, Mark eventually agreed. He realized that forcing a bitter custody battle would only hurt Lily, and he truly wanted the best for his daughter. Veronica, feeling the sting of rejection and the tarnish to her professional reputation, distanced herself from Mark and eventually left Harper & Green Investments to start over elsewhere. The last Mark heard, she had moved to New York, chasing another career opportunity, leaving Chicago and her entanglement with Mark behind. As the legalities of divorce progressed, Emma found unexpected support in her mother. Linda visited the lakeside cottage, bonding with Lily and offering Emma a shoulder to cry on. Slowly, Emma felt the suffocating pain, ease replaced by a cautious hope for the future. She began exploring freelance writing opportunities online, using her background in communications to earn an income. Mark, too, had to rebuild. He resigned from Harper & Green Investments after the scandal and took a lower-profile position at a smaller firm in the same industry. He attended therapy, trying to unravel the emotional blind spots that had led him astray. Though heartbreak lingered, he found solace in knowing he could still be part of Lily's life, visiting her on weekends and holidays according to the arrangement with Emma. Eventually, the divorce was finalized. The day Emma received the final decree, she stood by the lake once more, the wind ruffling her hair. A sense of bittersweet closure settled over her. She had loved Mark deeply, and part of her always would, but she understood now that love alone could not fix everything. Lily toddled up to her, holding a shiny pebble in her small hand. "For you, Mummy," she said, her eyes bright. Emma knelt down, taking the pebble and pulling Lily into a gentle hug. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "It's beautiful." In the distance, Aunt Eleanor watched with a soft smile. She remembered the frightened woman who had appeared on her doorstep all those months ago, searching for refuge. Now Emma stood taller, more assured, despite the heartbreak she had endured. That evening, Emma sat down at her laptop, beginning the process of searching for a place of her own, not too far from Aunt Eleanor's property. She wanted Lily to grow up surrounded by the serenity of nature, but she also needed to carve out an independent life. The phone rang a call from Mark. He was scheduled to see Lily that weekend. Emma's hand hovered over the phone for a moment before she answered. Their conversation was polite, cordial even. In that measured exchange, Emma recognized that while their romantic relationship might be irreparably broken, they could still strive for an amicable partnership as parents. And so life began anew for Emma Davenport, no longer a suburban wife living under the illusion of marital bliss, but a single mother forging her own path, confident in her ability to protect the tiny life in her care, and determined to heal her own wounded heart. This was the story of a shocking betrayal, a bold escape, and one mother's steadfast resolve to protect her child at all costs. Emma's world turned upside down the moment she discovered her husband in that hotel lobby. Yet she found the strength to leave and start over, even when her heart still ached with love and loss. Through family solitude and a fierce commitment to her daughter, she carved a new path for them both.